Welcome to Glisso English. Real life stories.
Have you ever carried a heavy burden that no one else could see? Today, we are following the story of Michael. To the world, he looks perfectly healthy, but every step he takes is a battle against a pain that is completely invisible. What happens when the world judges you based on how you look rather than what you feel? When Michael takes a priority seat on a crowded bus, a confrontation breaks out that changes everything. This story isn't just about a bus ride. It is about standing up for yourself when your voice is the only thing people can hear. As we follow Michael, we will learn essential English vocabulary for describing health, social dilemmas, and personal resilience. Pay close attention to the dialogue and the new words. At the end of the video, there will be a quiz to test what you have learned. Make sure to check the description for chapter timestamps. Let us begin with Chapter 1, The Morning Calculus. The alarm clock on the bedside table chirps at 6 a.m., but Michael has been awake for an hour. Before he opens his eyes, he performs what he calls his internal scan. It is a silent mental check of every joint, every muscle, and every nerve. On a scale of 1 to 10, today is a 7, a sharp, throbbing reminder that his body is at war with itself. Michael pushes the duvet aside, moving with the slow, deliberate caution of a much older man. To anyone watching, he looks like a fit 30-year-old in the prime of his life. They cannot see the invisible fire radiating from his lower back or the heavy fog in his brain. He sits on the edge of the bed, counting his spoons, his limited units of daily energy. Taking a shower will cost 1 spoon. Making breakfast will cost another. By the time he leaves his apartment, he will already be halfway through his reserve for the day. He dresses in layers, hiding the heating pads and the compression gear that hold him together. As he laces his shoes, a sharp wince escapes his lips, but he quickly swallows it. He catches his reflection in the hallway mirror and adjusts his posture until he looks normal. He practices a neutral expression, the mask he wears so the world doesn't ask questions. Michael grabs his bag and steps out the door, bracing himself for the long walk to the bus stop. Every step is a calculation, a silent struggle hidden behind a perfectly healthy face.
The bus arrives at the corner of 5th and Main, hissing as the heavy doors swing open. Michael climbs the steps, his knees clicking with a dull ache that makes him catch his breath. The vehicle is packed, a sea of commuters swaying in rhythm with the engine's vibration. He scans the aisle, his heart sinking as he sees every standard seat is already taken. The bus lurches forward, and Michael nearly loses his balance, a sharp bolt of pain shooting up his spine. There, near the front, is a single empty seat marked with the blue priority symbol. He hesitates for a second, feeling the familiar weight of social anxiety pressing against his chest. He looks at the elderly woman standing near the back and the man with the heavy briefcase. Then his hip gives a warning throb, a signal that his legs are about to buckle. Michael moves toward the empty spot and lowers himself onto the hard plastic chair. The relief is immediate, a cooling sensation as the pressure is lifted from his inflamed nerves. He closes his eyes for a moment, letting out a long, silent exhale of gratitude. He knows he doesn't look like someone who needs this seat. He looks like a young man taking the easy way out. He keeps his head down, staring at the scuffed floor of the bus, trying to remain invisible. A few stops later, the crowd grows thicker, and the air in the bus becomes warm and recycled. He feels a shadow fall over him, and a cold shiver of intuition tells him that his peace is about to end.
The shadow belongs to a tall woman in a sharp business suit, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. She clears her throat loudly, but Michael keeps his eyes fixed on his phone, hoping the moment will pass. "Excuse me," she says, her voice cutting through the hum of the engine like a serrated blade. Michael looks up, meeting her narrowed eyes and the judgmental stares of the passengers nearby. "Don't you think you should give that seat to someone who actually needs it?" she asks, gesturing toward an older man standing behind her. The older man looks away, embarrassed, but the woman leans in closer, her face reddening with a sense of duty. Michael feels his face flush, the heat of the shame rising faster than the physical pain in his joints. "I actually do need this seat," Michael says, his voice sounding thinner and more fragile than he intended. The woman lets out a sharp, mocking laugh that draws the attention of the entire front half of the bus. "You look perfectly fine to me," she snaps, her words landing like physical blows against his chest. "There are people here with real problems, and you're just being lazy and disrespectful," she continues. Michael opens his mouth to explain about the inflammation and the nerves, but the words feel heavy and useless. How do you describe a fire that no one else can see to someone who has already decided you are a liar? The woman turns to the crowd, seeking an audience for her performance of moral superiority. "Unbelievable," she mutters loudly. "Young people today have absolutely no shame or consideration for others." Michael grips the edge of the seat, his knuckles turning white as he tries to decide whether to fight or flee.
The woman's voice acts like a signal, and suddenly Michael feels a dozen pairs of eyes judging him. A man sitting across the aisle shakes his head, whispering something to the person next to him. "She is right," a voice calls out from the back. "Show some respect for your elders, young man." Michael feels the walls of the bus closing in, the air becoming thick with the weight of their collective disapproval. He looks at the older man standing in the aisle, who is now looking at Michael with a mixture of pity and confusion. Michael wants to stand up and shout about the invisible needles pricking his skin and the exhaustion in his marrow. Instead, he feels a wave of intense humiliation that makes his hands tremble in his lap. The self-righteous woman is still staring at him, waiting for him to break under the pressure of her gaze. He realizes that in this arena, his physical pain is irrelevant because it cannot be proven with a bandage or a cast. To them, he is not a patient or a person in need. He is simply a symbol of a selfish generation. The pressure becomes too much to bear, and Michael knows he cannot sit there for another second. He grabs the metal railing, his joints screaming in protest as he pulls himself into a standing position. The woman immediately slides into the seat before he is even fully upright, a smug look of victory on her face. Michael stumbles as the bus turns a sharp corner, his lower back flaring with a white-hot intensity. He clings to the overhead strap, his arm shaking from the effort of holding his own weight. Nobody says a word as he stands there, shaking and invisible once again in the middle of the crowd.
Michael steps off the bus at his stop, his legs feeling like they are made of lead and broken glass. The walk to his office building, usually a 10-minute stroll, now feels like a trek across a desert. Every jarring impact of his heels against the concrete sends a fresh wave of agony through his hips. He finally reaches his desk and sinks into his chair, but the physical relief is overshadowed by a dark cloud. His mind keeps replaying the woman's mocking laugh and the nodding heads of the other passengers. The second injury has set in. the emotional exhaustion that follows a public confrontation about his health. He tries to focus on his computer screen, but the words blur as a brain fog begins to settle over him. His boss walks by and asks for a report, but Michael can only offer a tight, strained smile in return. "You look tired today, Michael," the boss says casually, before walking away without waiting for an answer. Michael stares at his hands, realizing how exhausting it is to constantly perform the role of a healthy person. He feels like a ghost haunting his own life, invisible in his suffering and misunderstood in his strength. He reaches into his bag for his medication, swallowing a pill with a lukewarm sip of water. He knows the medicine will take time to work, and until then, he must simply endure the quiet throb of the day. The office buzzes with energy around him, but Michael feels like he is trapped behind a thick sheet of glass. He wonders if he should have stayed in bed, but he knows that hiding away would mean letting the pain win. He takes a deep breath, closes his eyes for a second, and starts to type, one painful keystroke at a time.
Michael retreats to the office restroom during his lunch break, locking the door behind him. He leans against the cool tile wall, waiting for the tremors in his legs to subside. He catches a glimpse of himself in the wide, fluorescent-lit mirror above the sinks. He leans in close, searching his own face for a sign, a crack, a blemish, a mark of the war inside. His skin is clear, his eyes are bright, and his hair is neatly combed for the workday. "I look fine," he whispers to the empty room, his voice echoing with a bitter edge. He remembers the 3 years it took to get a diagnosis and the endless cycle of medical tests. He recalls the doctors who looked at his clean scans and suggested he was simply working too hard. Even the people who were supposed to help him couldn't see the fire through the healthy exterior. The irony is a heavy weight. He has spent his whole life trying to fit in and look normal. Now that very normality has become a cage that prevents the world from offering him grace. He thinks of the woman on the bus and wonders if she would have been kind if he had a cast. If his pain were a broken bone or a surgical scar, she would have offered him a hand instead of a lecture. He touches his lower back, where the nerves are humming with a low electric vibration. He realizes that his reflection is a stranger, a deceptive image that lies to everyone he meets. Michael splashes cold water on his face, dries his hands, and prepares to step back into the lie. Michael meets his friend Sarah for a quick coffee after his shift ends at the office. He sinks into the padded chair, the soft fabric feeling like a luxury after a long day. "You look a bit stressed, Michael," Sarah says, stirring her latte with a casual smile. Michael hesitates, then tells her about the woman on the bus and the crowd's cold judgment. "That sounds awful," Sarah says, but her eyes are already drifting toward her buzzing phone. "But honestly, you should have just told them you have a chronic condition," she adds. Michael feels a familiar pang of frustration. He has tried that before, and it rarely works. "It is not that simple, Sarah," he explains, his voice dropping to a weary, low whisper. "I do not want to have to beg for a seat or show medical records to a stranger." Sarah shrugs, her tone light and dismissive, as if the solution were as easy as a pill. "Well, if you don't say anything, you can't really blame them for not knowing," she says. The comment feels like a slap, a subtle suggestion that the conflict was somehow Michael's fault. He realizes that even those who care for him cannot truly grasp the weight of his reality. They see the Michael who shows up for coffee, not the Michael who crawls to the shower. He finishes his drink in silence, feeling the invisible wall between them grow a little taller. "I should go," he says, standing up as his joints crack with a sharp, audible pop. Sarah doesn't notice the sound, waving goodbye as she scrolls through her social media feed. Michael walks out into the cool evening air, feeling more alone in the city than ever before.
Michael stands at the bus stop the following Monday, his heart racing faster than the approaching engine. The familiar yellow bus pulls up to the curb, and a cold sweat breaks out on his forehead. He feels the phantom weight of the woman's gaze from last week, a memory that burns like a fever. His back is screaming today, a sharp 7 on his internal scale that makes every breath a struggle. He boards the bus and sees the priority seat is open once again, beckoning him like a trap. Michael hesitates, his hand gripping the cold metal pole as he considers standing for the entire journey. He imagines the whispers and the judgmental glares if he dares to sit down again. "Just stand," a voice in his head commands. "It is easier than having to defend your existence." He leans against the pole, but a sudden lurch of the bus sends a jagged spike of pain through his hip. He nearly falls, his face turning pale as he gasps for air in the crowded, humid aisle. In that moment, Michael realizes that looking healthy has become a prison he built for himself. He is sacrificing his physical well-being just to appease the comfort of strangers who do not know him. Why should he suffer in silence just to avoid a confrontation with people who choose not to see? He looks at the blue priority sign and realizes it is not a suggestion, it is a necessity for his survival. Michael takes a step forward, his jaw set in a firm line of newfound quiet defiance. He lowers himself into the seat, his eyes fixed forward, refusing to hide his struggle any longer. The bus roars to life, and Michael sits tall, bracing himself not for the pain, but for the truth. The bus pulls up to the same stop from last week, and the doors hiss open. Michael feels his pulse quicken as a familiar figure steps up the middle stairs. It is the same woman in the sharp suit, her eyes scanning the cabin for a target. She spots Michael in the priority seat and marches toward him with a familiar scowl. "You again?" she says, her voice loud enough to make the person next to her jump. "I thought we had a conversation about being respectful to people who actually have disabilities." Michael feels the old familiar panic rising in his throat, a cold wave of anxiety. He looks at her, then at the passengers who are turning their heads to watch. Instead of looking down at his feet, Michael takes a slow, steady breath and looks up. "I have a chronic condition that makes it very painful for me to stand," he says firmly. The woman rolls her eyes, letting out a sharp, theatrical sigh of disbelief for her audience. "Everyone has a condition these days when they want to be lazy," she sneers back. Michael reaches into his bag and pulls out a small laminated card he made over the weekend. It simply says, "Invisible disability. Standing causes severe pain. Thank you for your understanding." He doesn't offer it as an apology. He holds it up as a quiet, undeniable fact. The woman looks at the card, then at Michael's steady, unwavering gaze, and her mouth snaps shut. She huffs and turns away, but the triumph Michael feels isn't about winning an argument. It is the feeling of finally standing up for himself without having to stand up from his seat. The man sitting across the aisle gives Michael a small, knowing nod of silent support. Michael leans back, his heart slowing down as the bus continues its journey through the city. Michael steps off the bus and walks toward the office, his pace slow but his head held high. The morning sun reflects off the glass buildings, casting long, bright shadows across the pavement.
He reaches into his bag and pulls out a collapsible cane he purchased over the weekend. With a quick flick of his wrist, the metal sections snap into place with a satisfying click. He doesn't need it for every step, but he needs it to tell the story his face cannot. As he enters the lobby, the security guard, who usually just nods, holds the heavy door open. "Morning, Michael," the guard says, his eyes dropping briefly to the cane before meeting Michael's. Michael offers a genuine smile, feeling a strange sense of relief at finally being seen. He realizes that by hiding his struggle, he was accidentally helping the world ignore it. The cane is not a sign of defeat, it is a tool of communication and a badge of his resilience. He sits at his desk and opens his laptop, the brain fog feeling lighter than it did yesterday. He knows the pain is still there, humming beneath his skin like a constant low-voltage current. But the weight of the secret, the exhausting performance of being normal, has finally lifted. He is no longer a ghost in a healthy body. He is a man navigating a complex reality. During his break, he pulls out his phone and joins an online community for people with chronic illness. For the first time, he shares his story about the bus, typing the words with steady fingers. He ends the post with a simple thought: "My disability is invisible, but I am not." Michael closes his eyes, leans back in his chair, and breathes in the quiet strength of his own truth.
The story of Michael reminds us that the hardest battles are often the ones no one can see. Michael's journey began with a morning calculus, a struggle to balance his limited energy against a world that demands constant movement. When he was confronted on the bus, he faced a social dilemma that many people with chronic illness experience every day. By choosing to make his invisible disability visible with a cane and a firm voice, Michael stopped performing for others and started caring for himself. True resilience isn't just about enduring pain. It is about the courage to speak your truth when the world refuses to look beneath the surface. Michael's story shows us that advocacy is a skill. It takes practice to stand up for yourself, especially when your struggle is invisible. I hope this story helped you understand the challenges of chronic pain and gave you the words to describe complex social situations in English. We used several advanced terms today. Did you catch the meaning of self-righteous or resilience? These are powerful words to use when discussing social issues and personal strength. Now it is your turn to practice. I have prepared a vocabulary quiz based on Michael's story. You can find it below the description box. Testing yourself is the best way to move these words into your long-term memory. Don't forget to check the video description for the full metadata and chapter timestamps if you want to review a specific part of the story. Thank you for watching, and remember, your voice is your most powerful tool. See you in the next story. Goodbye.